ja et videosild on meil ka siis juristiga, kes annab meile siis ülevaate, mis on toimumas Euroopa Liidu ja WHO regulatsioonides. Silvia Behrendt on siis doktorikraadiga jurist, kes töötab koos Philip Krausega maailma regulatsioonide nii-öelda käe pulsil hoidmisega. Ja hello, Silvia.
Hello, everybody. I hope, yes, I hope you can hear me as well.
Yes, we do.
And yes, thank you very much for this very honorable invitation. And it was a very impressive presentations of each speaker, and particularly of my Jessica. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for joining us, and we are really looking forward for your presentation. So you are welcome to start.
So very good. So now I share my screen, which should work right now. I just have to. So, again, no, wait. One. So it's a bit slow. Wait 1 second, and it should turn up as presentation. It's just, yeah, no.
We can see it, but maybe you can put
it on screen. Now it's a presentation version. So my topic is now, we jump like from the science to the legal order, which I think looks like a huge step, but it is actually not so far away as it looks like, especially what I heard like at the end of the presentation of Jessica. I called the topic as Reframing Emergency Use Authorizations. Is it the creation of a real public health emergency? But I think we first have to deframe emergency use authorizations, and then we have to find altogether a new frame for this, let's call it regulatory authority, which has done very tremendous things, because those vaccines are called authorizations because they are emergency authorizations. So what's behind those authorizations? I first wanted to make like an entire overview of the globe, but it did not fit in the presentation. So I decided, because WHO is a very important point of reference, or the global point of reference, I decided that I focus on the WHO emergency use authorization, because I think most listeners will be very surprised that they will find out that WHO has of its own an emergency use authorization, what they use actually very strongly. So we should build an international legal order where human dignity, fundamental freedoms, and the inviolable human rights, particularly with regard to medical treatments and experiments, are secured without any exception. It means without any exceptions during emergency times. And any violation by an international organization or other actor is held to account. So because behind an emergency use authorization, there is nobody liable. Nobody can be taken into account. That's the problem we have. So first we have to frame a bit the emergency use authorizations. What is it about? So the actual purpose, if you dig a bit, you find out very within the first second that it has been introduced first. It's a very novel regulatory tool, which has been introduced first by the US in as early as 2004 due to this bioterrorism legislation. And it's I think very good to know and to bear in mind that this was not the traditional way the medical authorities worked up to recently. So this is actually a new tool they're using upon us, and it was legitimized because there could be a threat caused by terrorism. And that's the reason why they actually invented this new regulatory tool. So to have immediate medical countermeasures for investigational medical products during health emergencies, and especially if you look at the global picture, in case the WHO declares a fake, that's a public health emergency of international concern. So this brings us to the legal concept or the legal instrument of the international health regulations, which most of you have already heard. James Rogaski is a very great activist who does a lot of information about international health regulations and also others. And it's just my topic of expertise. I've written a PhD on the executive authority of the Director General during international health regulation, during public health emergencies. So it was based on the IHR. So it's legally binding since 2007, this new concept at the level of WHO. And they started to introduce this entirely new concept of public health emergencies in 2001. So you can find, if you look down all the documents and the resolutions of the World Health Organization, you find in 2001 that they were searching for a definition what a public health emergency could be. This is exactly the time frame when the US started to start a lot of bioterrorism legislation. So this gave actually, and it's also very important to know that in the IHR, nothing is told about medical countermeasures. There's no word on it, and there's no word on emergency use authorizations. But the World Health Organization had a huge problem at the moment because not all countries were prepared in terms of the pandemic preparedness because they call emergency use authorizations as part of pandemic preparedness for the countries. So not all countries were prepared, especially not least and middle income developing countries. So they had to take over the emergency use authorization at the global level. But this was very tricky because they could not say we authorize it because it is an ultra-virus act. This is beyond their capacity to authorize something. So they did something very suspicious. They said, we will make a list. We are doing procurement for the entire world together with UNICEF. They procure huge vaccine amounts and with Gavi. And within this procurement, they are authorizing the vaccine. So this department extended their authority to have investigational drugs having a license in terms of listing, which is actually only semantics, but in fact it's been used as a real authorization by Gavi, and we have evidence about everything. But for the publicity, they call it, it's only listing. So this is what the procedure looks like. And here we have a nice visualization of the public health emergencies at WHO, because this is at the very core of every emergency use authorization. And this is also the reason why so many people were always searching why the WHO changed its pandemic definition. This is not important in terms of law and in terms of vaccine authorization. The only thing that is important is whether is it a public health emergency, and the Director General declared it on the 31st of December 2020, the public health emergency. And at this second, they could start to have emergency use authorizations at the national level. So at the WHO level, you see the constitution, which is more or less nicely formulated, but not put to action. Then you have the international health regulations, which is a special procedure, and it's very legally it's complicated to explain, and it would be beyond the scope of this presentation. But just that you know, it's part of WHO's legal framework. That's enough to know for you at this point. And then they invented themselves, without member states' consent, they invented the emergency use authorization procedure, which they take now. Listing it's called, but it's the same as a authorization procedure. The EUL in late December 2020, at the time when the COVID vaccines were ready to be authorized at the national level. And then they, of course, have, like within the legal frame, WHO makes a lot of technical guidelines. So you see how, like, let's say the pandemic is created. You have, first you need the surveillance diagnostics, then you need to declare a fake. Then you have the emergency authorization, and then you have the countermeasures ready. That's how it works. So the most important thing for you to know is that without this regulatory procedure, there is no medical countermeasures regime. And if there's no medical countermeasures regime, the entire thing is kind of empty. I would call it like that. And this is so important why we have to look at how is that defined, because everything rests upon a definition, and then you find a very, let's say, ridiculous level within this international health regulations, because of course there is almost no severity. So the definition reads, a fake means an extraordinary event which constitutes a public health risk through spreading. Okay, this can be everything. And it requires a coordinated international response. So that's all you need to know. And then you have a set of predefined diseases, which is, if you can read on the very left, severe acute respiratory syndrome. So we had a SARS-CoV-2 outbreak, and it was a priority disease by WHO. So they are looking for certain diseases. And then if there's some international spread, there's nothing about lethality in this definition, nothing about severity. Yeah, then you can have a fake. And then you have an emergency use authorization, which is not in correlation to the threat of the disease. So they're like stopping all the safety guidelines we had is not appropriate. So then you have, to show it a bit, to make it a bit clear in mind, and it's easier to understand, how does the medical countermeasure regulation at WHO work? First, you have a fake declared by the Director General because it fits in this definition of a fake. And then you can start the emergency use listing procedure. But that's not all. So it's much more complicated. Because first of all, it's to improve regulatory preparedness, what I already told you. And then it says here, the Director General may authorize the use of this procedure for a public health emergency that does not meet the criteria of a fake if he or she determines that this is in the best interest of public health. So what does this mean? Nothing else than they can already make this procedure available without a fake, prior to a fake. So I will speak more about this in next slides. So now it means the purpose of an emergency use authorization is to deviate from very long-standing safety standards of domestic regulatory agencies, and it is part of the securitization of public health through the global health security doctrine, which has nothing to do with a long-standing medical expertise, what doctors need to apply. So these are two different things: securitization of public health and the global health security concept, what is being applied at the emergency use authorization with what we actually require. So how does it function in a bit more details, and how does this relate to the drafts of the pandemic treaty? Because everybody's curious, and this is always what I would like to show everybody. Much of what we read in the draft is already in application and active at the WHO level. So we have to be very, very strong in stopping WHO, because they are already doing a lot of things they are now legislating. So at the time being, you should know that there's not only a COVID fake, there's a long-standing fake of polio. I think it's since 2014. I did not check that, maybe it could be wrong, but it's since a couple of years ongoing. And it has to do with having new vaccines for polio, because the threat of polio is not as traumatic as it is, in the media communicated. Then you have COVID-19, and then you have monkeypox. And monkeypox is, by the way, a perfect example to show that this has been declared without the emergency committee, which has to be asked. And actually, the emergency committee has to authorize the Director General whether this constitutes a fake or not. using this flowchart, but he did it all on himself, declaring a monkeypox fake, which where we see this is a huge complex of problems creating. So what's actually in the draft? So just only very shortly, one very important thing is that that in the International Health Regulations draft, there is a new or an extension of the authority of the Director General to declare not only the public health emergency, but also to declare an intermediate health alert. And this intermediate health alert actually is the pre-fake of the emergency use listing procedure, which I will also show you later in more detail. So we have no oversight of this procedure. There's nothing in the drafts which would give you or which would give the civil society or any vaccine-insured people or anybody an oversight what they are doing at the international level, and they are protected by all immunities and all privileges they could just use, and they use it. So I will show you this also. So see, this is the procedure which you can download at WHO. It says there is a pre-emergency phase, an emergency phase, and a post-listing phase, which is something like pharmacovigilance, but of course it's not working at the global level. It's unbelievable. So, and then I would also like to show you that it's not only the different phases we can see in this procedure, it's also how, let's say, pandemic is made up from the very start. So you can see here, as products in development are added to the pipeline for each priority disease, there are several activities that can be planned and executed during the pre-emergency phase. So this means nothing else than WHO has a set of priority diseases, which is also very well known as Disease X list. And this is the list all the global manufacturers work on in the labs for providing to WHO at the moment, right now, because there's no, except for the three emergencies, public health emergencies declared, there's no other public health emergency. So they are right now negotiating with WHO on various diseases of this priority. And one I've chosen as example, one is Marburg. So if you visualize it again, so the first in the process is WHO X list of priority research diseases, which is taken then by pharma, and they go to WHO prior in the pre-fake stadium. So our example, as I already told you, is the Marburg virus disease, which is a very recent outbreak from February to March, I think, or a bit earlier. And they already have alerted all levels at WHO about this outbreak in Africa. So here you see this site at WHO where those priority diseases are listed. And each priority disease is accompanied and added with a R&D blueprint. And this blueprint will tell you how to proceed globally. So we have this this is a news ad from the 15th of April, so a very recent one, where they say there have been 11 deaths, one confirmed, one is unknown, and there's, I think, something like 70.6% fatality, case fatality ratio. So this means this is the highest level of priority now. And it's among the diseases that require assessment under the International Health Regulations. So they already started the procedure. And here you have, again, that's the flowchart from the EUL process. Here you see it very perfectly. You have the pre-emergency with the priority diseases, and then you have the submission of the manufacturers. So going back, so see, the submission means pharma submission. So this means pharma steps in right now. We have the process of the pharma stepped in. And here's also the list of the emergency use listing procedure where they show the activities, and you can see the activities in the pre-emergency. The pre-emergencies are the most active, almost the most active engagements with WHO. So now going back to our example, there is a Marburg WHO vaccine consortium on the Marburg disease, which has been already constituted last year. It says 21, but I tried to check it. It's somehow hidden from the public. I think it was, other sources said October 22, but it was on WHO's call. And it's for the coordination of the R&D blueprint. So the Marburg members of this consortium, which are the like the most important vaccine pharmaceutical companies, are right now at WHO giving their presentations. And we have here on the 14th of February, there was very interesting presentations already done with discussions on the clinical evaluation of new candidate vaccines. And then there was on the 10th of March, so almost a month later, and this is a really interesting homepage at WHO, site on WHO, there was a research kind of this Marburg consortium had presentations. And you can download, actually, if you go on the actual site, you can find it very easily at WHO. You can download for each hyperlink a PowerPoint presentation, which gives you, for example, this one from the R&D blueprint from WHO. This says because the first step in the R&D blueprint is the WHO does a prioritization of vaccines. So this is actually the outcome of that. There's nothing else than WHO is allowed to choose who will be successful, which is, of course, another very dangerous engagement between WHO and the private sector, because at this level, there's almost no, and there's no scrutiny, not almost no, but no scrutiny. And this is another two interesting slides where we can see a lot. Particularly, we can see that they are trying to raise the manufacturing doses available and could be used for outbreak containment until the end of 23. So they are very actively planning to push for a new vaccine production on Marburg. Or they are not planning on it, they are doing it. It has been activated, everything has been activated. So, and here you can see the enablers of vaccine research, they call it, it's in the R&D blueprint, prioritization, then they need companies with experiences in having doses available, and then this global virtual pooled inventory comes in and they streamline the access. Yeah, so, and interesting, and if you want to know whether a procedure is dangerous or not, you have to look at the disclaimer, because this will tell us how dangerous this procedure is in fact. And going one step back to the WHO regulatory powers, what they want to, in the negotiations of WHO, you will find that in the pandemic treaty as of now, there is Article 9, which says we have to find a global compensation mechanism for injuries resulting from pandemic vaccines, which is very interesting because they seem to know that there's a little of a problem with the emergency use authorization using investigational vaccines on the global population. So at the moment, we have no liability of any producers of pandemic products. We have indemnification regimes at WHO, which gives a lump sum if they have been submitted in the right time, and if people have been informed. But you know how difficult this is and how less they get. And there's very little knowledge about what this WHO indemnification actually does, or Gavi indemnification actually does. So, and then of course there's no communication or no obligation for adverse events. So, and this is also telling. So there has been a review committee report, which was a very important report for the international health regulations. And they were very cautious, saying it may be inadvisable from a legal perspective to require the WHO develop such regulatory guidelines, meaning emergency use authorization guidelines, as the liability in the event of a significant safety flaw that appears post-marketing of the product will then fall chiefly on the organization. But they're already having it done. They just call it listing, but Gavi takes those vaccines as authorization, and it's in all the legal documents of Gavi and COVAX. So it's ridiculous that they are doing this. And then we have the emergency use. If you look at the procedure, if you look at the first version of the emergency use listing procedure, you have, wait 1 second. Yeah. Christian? Oh, sorry. So you see the second version, they added up to the privileges and immunities of WHO, which is actually very telling, that they say that they don't have any, that they don't waive any immunities at all. And they're not liable. They're not liable for death. They're not liable for anything, even if they listed this new vaccine for the global population. So I think this should tell us enough. Procedure is actually construed. And then if we visualize this emergency use listing streamline further, we see that through the COVAX mechanism, which is also very complicated and I cannot explain it in detail, but actually COVAX could also be equated with Gavi in the end, because it's actually everything is delivered by Gavi. So they take all those vaccines from WHO directly. WHO emergency use listing vaccines, they even have their own labeling. Its own label, and if you go, for example, to the Comirnaty Global page, there was always a global homepage, Comirnaty Global, you could even click on product information of WHO. So this is 100% evidence that it's used as an authorization. But then 92 least and middle income countries, all those people who receive the vaccine, they receive it directly from WHO. They have no other instance where they can go. They cannot sue nothing. So this is a huge scandal, I think. See, here is the information about the no-fault compensation program, which is full and final settlement with a lump sum. And we all know it's not a fair mechanism and not a fair insurance. It's actually true for the entire global population. There's no country which has a fair compensation scheme. Otherwise, they would not have distributed to us. So, so they do not get compensated. So how do we have to reframe WHO's use listing in terms of ethical and human experimentation? Because this is the other problem that is not talked about it enough, because the authorities do not like to be told that those are investigational products. But WHO does say this in their regulatory procedures. This is investigational. So, and if you visualize it, you have clinical trials, and parallel to clinical trials, you have the emergency use listing. This means it creates two sets of people. The ones who are in the emergency use, that's the global population, this one is discriminated, because you cannot have huge clinical trials ongoing without the result, while at the same time everybody gets the vaccines. I mean, this is not possible. And then you have, and if you look at the details, so it's also too complicated to explain it, but just that I've told you very briefly about it. If you look at the details at WHO, it's within Annex 5, the essential data requirements, they can use it as they wish. This procedure is arbitrary. You there's nothing in this procedure which would say they need to, by minimum, they have to have this and that and that. No, by minimum, it says under the animal rule, that's enough. So that's for the global population in the end. And if the pandemic treaty and the IHR amendments will get through next year, what they will, because the political will is there, they will extend this procedure to the global population, and they will, make like the baseline for all national regulatory authorities. So the ethical considerations are very tremendous because there are no safeguards to ensure the ethical application. There is no justification to eliminate or reduce the standards because the fake has no severity, and even if it has, they cannot authorize it and call it authorization. They could still call it's a clinical trial vaccine, what you could use if you want to, but they are not calling it like that. So the Marburg trial design is during the interim. So if you look at this, you see a bit how they set it up. During the interim epidemic period, that's our period. No, we are actually at level 2. We are during outbreaks. So they are all those priority diseases, not only Marburg. We have a lot of other priority diseases. They are searching for vaccines all the time. This is actually the very baseline what I would like to tell you. And also there's another global initiative called VAREF of WHO related to Marburg. The developers are really, the open doors are open at WHO level. They are very happy to help if a pharmaceutical company would have to have a clinical trial. But if I call there, or if you call there, they will not be happy about you asking questions or having the scientific truth say to you. But if you're a pharmaceutical company, they're happy to tell you how the African market is accessible to developers. This is also what I read for like the last time. The opening statement in Nuremberg, some physicians were trialed because they were not part of the Nazi party, but all of them violated the Hippocratic commandments, which they had solemnly sworn to uphold and abide by, including the fundamental principles never to do harm. And I think we should know that this procedure does harm by law. And that's the reason why we have to create a new legal order. So this was, and like also civil society has to be very loud and raise the alarm to say, you have to be responsible, you have to stop this emergency use procedure. So thank you very much for your attention, and yeah.
Thank you very much, Silvia. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Very good. It was very, very interesting presentation. We are running over time right now, but can we ask you to join us for our discussion panel? Maybe someone has a question for you.
Yeah, sure.
And the discussion panel will be